Hi, I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we have our NFL Week 15 predictions, which is the first full week now since the first 4 weeks. There are no more bye weeks, no more teams on bye. So every week from now on is going to be a full slate of NFL entertainment. So you gotta love it. But before we jump into those games, a quick update on our head-to-head pick'em games. Last week there was a ton of teams on bye, inverse from this week. So not very many points on the board. So we both had a pretty decent week. I picked up 9 total points while Callan only picked up 7 total points. But like I said, considering that there was a very limited number of matchups on the board, those are pretty good. But now I regained the lead with a score of total 132 to Callan's 131. So we're still just hanging right around that 1 point difference, but we're flip-flopping back on forth on who has that 1 point difference every week.
Yeah, last week it was me that had the 1 point differential. I went for a couple upsets last week and didn't hit on them. I did hit on the Rams upset. I was pretty excited about that one. But I missed my actual upset, and my lock did hit, luckily, but just barely with that Cowboys game.
Yep, we both hit our lock and missed our upset last week, so it just came down to a lot of regular games in that one. So now moving on to this week, we're going to start with the Thursday night football game, a huge divisional matchup with the San Francisco 49ers heading to Seattle to take on the Seahawks. And Cal and I start off by agreeing we both have the 49ers on this one. If the 49ers win this game, they officially take the NFC West and become the division winners there. They lock that in. And after how Seattle played last week, depending on who comes back in that running back room with Kenneth Walker and DJ Dallas both being out last week, we might see an absolute domination by this 49ers defense. I mean, if you saw what that Panthers defensive line and defense in general was able to do to Seattle, can you even imagine what this 49ers defense is going to be able to do? I know that the 49ers are very beat up on offense now with both Deebo Samuels being out with a sprained MCL and ankle, and of course Jimmy Garoppolo being out for the season. But that offense probably isn't going to have to do much at the end of the day, and I see that defense almost putting up more points than the 49ers offense.
It definitely could be. That defense has become quite the monster, and that's why I picked the 49ers, is because of that defense and DeMeco Ryans. He's probably going to be the assistant of the year and be a prime head coaching candidate. And I wouldn't be surprised if he got a really nice head coaching job next year. But the way he's coached that defense, they have still held teams scoreless in most second halves, except for that Dolphins game where they got 1 touchdown. And that's just amazing to hear. They were able to shut down Tom Brady and the Bucs last week. And I believe that even though they have Brock Purdy at quarterback, he played pretty good. And I believe that the Niners are going to be able to take away this win and win their division.
Yeah, Purdy was able to do exactly what he needed to do. And with that defense, that's all he needed to do. So you'd love to see that there. So moving on, from this week on, there will be 3 Saturday games each week. But for this week, we're just going to talk about one of them, which is the Indianapolis Colts heading to Minnesota to take on the Vikings. And not only a split here, but a double down split, because I have the Vikings as my lock this week and Callan has the Colts as his upset.
Yep, I think this is the game where the Vikings come out flat and they have their annual letdown game against a mediocre team. I would say it was last week, but they played pretty well last week with over 400 yards of total offense. Justin Jefferson set a franchise record in receiving yards. They really should have won that game when you look at the stats. But the Lions, though they are a mediocre team, I think that the Colts are more mediocre and are more lost, especially with Jeff Saturday at head coach, where he's just so inexperienced. You can really see that come out, and especially in the time management. But I believe that the Vikings will allow the Colts to stay in it, and that running game will take over for the Colts and give them the win.
The Vikings already had our letdown game. It was the Dallas game. I've already diagnosed it. We're past it now. We're moving on to greener fields. But one point I do agree with on you there is if the Vikings lose this game, it'll be on the back of Jonathan Taylor. I am terrified of that man. Our running defense has been so all year. So I'm very afraid Jonathan Taylor, coming off of that nice restful bye week, is going to come out and absolutely tear us apart. But I think the Vikings should have Harrison Smith back this week. I don't think the Colts defense has a chance against the Vikings offense. So I could see this being an actually pretty high scoring offensive battle game. But nevertheless, I see the Vikings coming out on top. There's been a lot of games this year where the Vikings probably shouldn't have won, but just through kind of some luck and some breaks and some pretty good time management by Kevin O'Connell, the Vikings have been able to come out on top. And like Callan mentioned, the Colts have really struggled in the late game this year. So I could see this being a close game that comes down to some sort of really good play by the Vikings or some really horrific play by the Colts late in the game, really deciding the outcome and letting the Vikings come out on top.
The Vikings will have something break their way at the end, and it'll go and benefit them just like it has all season.
Oh, listen to this guy complain after one bad season. I've been dealing that with in Green Bay for 18 years now. So moving on to the Sunday game, starting with another divisional matchup in the NFC South this time, with the Atlanta Falcons heading to New Orleans to take on the Saints, and yet another split. Callan has the Saints in this one. I have the Falcons. Both of these teams just came off of a bye week last week, so that's an interesting thing to have a divisional matchup with two previous bye week teams. But the Falcons are my favorite to win that division still. I don't know why, because they really haven't proven much to me. But that NFC South is more than up for grabs, and it'll probably end up coming down to the Bucs or the Panthers as the season goes on. But I still got the Falcons in my heart. I think that they really have a chance to win this division. And I think that Mariota is going to come out rested after a bye week and a long season before that bye week, be able to pick up a divisional win here in New Orleans.
Mariota is actually out. They're starting Desmond Ridder.
I did not know that.
Yep, Mariota got an injury over the bye week and at practice and is now out for the rest of the season. They will actually be starting Desmond Ridder, and I believe because of that, the Saints should have the upper hand in this because they're starting a rookie quarterback who's starting late in the season. I've picked the Saints a number of times this year, and they've let me down, but I believe that this will be the game that they get back on track. And this is basically an NFC South elimination game with the loser falling over 2 games out of the lead. And I believe that the Saints will be the ones to come out on top.
I have a little bit of a correction then, but not a full one then. If Mariota's out for the year, the Falcons are no longer my favorite to win that division.
I didn't think so.
But I am actually still, I'm going to stick with them for this game. I still think that Ridder can come out and do just enough to beat the Saints. Because as Callan mentioned, Saints have been pretty well let down this season. Mm-hmm. The Saints were actually my NFC South frontrunner to start the year, but then have just totally kind of fell apart before our eyes. So no more Falcons as my frontrunner for the NFC South, but still Falcons as my frontrunner for this game. So moving on, we got a NFC versus AFC matchup this time with the Detroit Lions heading to New York to take on the Jets. We have a split here. Callan has the Jets and I have the Lions in this one. And I actually mark this as the game of the week because these are two teams who might not be marquee teams in the NFL right now, but two teams that are having surprisingly good seasons and have been on a little bit of a run as of recently, and two teams that somehow are still pretty comfortably in the playoff race if you look at the records and some of the records of their other teams in the AFC and NFC. But I had the Lions in this one because that offense is just so good. That defense is beyond struggling. Don't get me wrong there. Every game that the Lions have won, they've put up like 40 points. But nevertheless, sometimes that's just how the NFL goes these days. That Lions defense is able to kind of clutch up and clamp down when those few situations arise where they need to. And that offense can just consistently put up so many points. And it's hard for an opposing team to keep up with that. So I have the Lions in this one.
Yeah, and I got the Jets in this one because it would be beneficial for the Lions to lose to Green Bay. That's kind of how I made a couple of my picks this week is, picking on what would be beneficial.
Who do I want to win?
Who do I want to win, or who would help the Packers if they won? But I do believe the Jets whether it be Mike White or Zach Wilson. It'll be a very exciting game. It'll be a very tough game and for the Jets, and I do believe that they will come out on top.
Yep. Next up, we have a matchup in the AFC this time with the Kansas City Chiefs heading to Houston to take on the Texans. And another split here. Callan has the Chiefs and I have the Texans as my upset. Now I know that it is totally off the wall, and the odds that the Texans put together 2 pretty solid games back to back is about as the same odds as hitting a lottery right now. But I think that the Texans are going to kind of get a taste for that and say, wait a second, we can go against these good teams and we can play well and we can win one of these games. They weren't able to last week in Dallas, but the Chiefs showed a lot of cracks in their armor last week against the Denver Broncos team with Brett Ripken at quarterback for most of the game, not even Russell Wilson. So why not have Davis Mills and Jeff Driscoll or Kyle Allen or hell, whoever the Texans want to throw in next week, come in and actually put up a win against a marquee team in the NFL. Maybe I'm just hoping too much, but I would love to see it.
Well, they almost pulled out the upset last week, so it definitely showed that they can compete with the big boys. It's just that, can they put them away? And that's what we have yet to see. But I believe that the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes are just going to be too much. Patrick Mahomes is getting back to his fancy little razzle-dazzle stuff with the hook shot pass and the no-look pass, and it's going to come back to bite him. That's not always going to work, but I believe the Chiefs have too much talent to let the Texans win this one.
The Texans aren't good in many places, I'll be the first to admit it, but one place they are good is they have a stellar secondary and a great defensive coach in Lovie Smith. So Patrick Mahomes better watch what he tries to do against that secondary. Just one more quick little note just to make Callan angry. Look for a big game from Amari Rodgers. Last week in his first game as a Houston Texans after the Packers cut him, he had a touchdown catch and a couple of other catches. So
yeah.
Could Amari Rodgers become a real option in that Houston offense?
He could finally just break out. It could just finally click for him. Maybe he really needed that change of scenery. That really seems to make a difference for some guys.
It's been that kind of season for the Packers, so I could see it happening. But next up, we have an AFC matchup again with the Tennessee Titans heading to Los Angeles to take on the Chargers, and yet another split. Callan has the Titans in this one. I have the Chargers. This is a huge game for that AFC playoff race. The Titans are currently ahead of that AFC South, but not by a ton because they haven't had an overly great season either, and the Chargers are grasping on for dear life in that wild card race. So whoever wins this game, it's going to be a pretty big win for them nevertheless. And I have the Chargers in this one because I'm just sticking with them. I really like the Chargers. They finally actually have everybody healthy in that offense. They should be getting that defense a little more squared up and healthy next week. And that defense played pretty well, even being a little beat up. So I'm going to be excited to see what they can do when they're a little more healthy again. So I'm really on the Chargers train right now. I think that they are a playoff team and they will continue to win and earn it.
And I think the Titans will win. They're not as bad as they looked against the Jaguars last week. The Jaguars played a really great game, and Trevor Lawrence had the game of his life so far. But I believe that the Titans will get that running game going with Derrick Henry and be able to run all over the Chargers. And Tannehill will play just well enough to keep them ahead. As long as he doesn't make any of the crucial mistakes, I believe the Titans will win this game.
Yep. And then next up, we have an AFC versus NFC again with the Cincinnati Bengals heading to Tampa Bay to take on the Bucs. And yet another split. Finally a week where we actually have a lot of splits. I feel like we've been pretty even recently.
This is going to be separation week.
Callan has the Bucs. I have the Bengals in this one. The Bengals have been on a little bit of a hot streak, and they are fighting for their life in that AFC North right now. The Ravens are actually ahead of them right now, I believe, even with Tyler Huntley starting like half of the games this season compared to Lamar Jackson. So I think the Bengals realize that they're not just going to get lucky and win that division. They need to continue to play well, and they need to continue to pick up wins, or the Baltimore Ravens are going to sneak in ahead of them. And then with that kind of tightly contested top of the wild card race there in the AFC, a few things don't fall the Bengals away, and all of a sudden they're not even in the playoffs at a 9-4 record right now. So they know they need to continue to win and can't take it easy. And they're going against a very, and I'm not even going to say beat up necessarily, but just mentally beat up, low morale Bucs team right now. So I see the Bengals picking up a win.
Yeah, it's a very downtrodden Bucks team right now after last week's game. But same thing, like I said, for the Titans. The Bucks are not nearly as bad as they look. Tom Brady is definitely not that bad either. And he's proven it before that he can come back and win any game at any time. And I believe that he will get back on track this week against a tough Bengals team who usually has letdowns. It comes out flat sometimes. And I believe this to be one of the games where they could come out flat and the Buccaneers could pull away with this one early.
I've banked on the Bengals coming out flat a few times this year, and every time they've had one of the best games of their season. So I've given up on that. Next up, we got a first in Eating W's history with one of us picking a tie. We have a divisional matchup with the New York Giants heading to Washington to take on the Commanders for Sunday Night Football, and I have the Commanders in this one, and Callan has a tie predicted. So just a quick point before I let Callan talk. If this game does end as a tie, I'm going to give him 5 points for our pick'em. So Callan, why did you pick the tie?
Well, because it would be the most beneficial for Green Bay. But these teams just tied just two short weeks ago. They tied 20-20, and I believe that they're pretty evenly matched teams. Both of them fighting for playoff seeding, and oh geez, I keep stuttering.
A little bit of a stroke there.
A little
for
bit,
Callan.
yeah. and for position in the NFC East. But I just think that these teams will continue to battle out, and I think that a tie is a very real possibility since they just tied 2 weeks ago.
If these teams didn't tie 2 weeks ago, there's just no way it happens again. Luck is not that crazy. If these teams didn't just tie 2 weeks ago, I would not even think that was that crazy of an idea. And Callan is right. These are two insanely equally matched teams. They even kind of have similar play styles with a heavy run game and similar defenses. So pretty much the main reason I picked the Commies in this one is, first of all, they're at home. Second of all, they have a little bit better of a defense. And third of all, Taylor Heinicke just really has that winner spirit in him. There's a couple of the quarterbacks in the NFL right now that we love to talk about who just kind of have that winner spirit in them, and Taylor Heinicke is definitely one of those guys. So I have an extremely close game happening here, but not quite a tie and a win for the Commanders. So now to wrap it up, we have the Monday Night Football game of the Los Angeles Rams heading to Green Bay to take on the Packers in yet another split. I have the Rams in this one, and Callan has the Packers as his lock.
Yeah, I believe that this is going to be a really good game for Green Bay. They're coming off of their bye week. They got healthy. Everyone is back except for Bakhtiari, who has appendectomy. He'll be out for a couple more weeks. But as far as the rest of the injury report, everyone is off of it, including Romeo Doubs. So this will be the first time that we have Doubs and Christian Watson on the same field at the same time for the first time this season. And I think that'll be very exciting to watch. And even though Baker Mayfield was able to pull out the upset and the surprise last week, I believe that the Green Bay defense will just be too much for him to handle. And even though he has that fighting winner spirit, I think that Green Bay will just be too far ahead for him to be able to pull a miraculous comeback again.
The Raiders, who the Rams just beat last week, are a very similar team. They are pretty much the AFC equivalent to Green Bay this season. Kind of a letdown season, some other things, some injuries happening around them, and they would have had to win out to make the playoffs. Pretty much same situation the Packers are in right now. So I think Baker Mayfield is going to play heartbreaker again. I think he's going to go into Green Bay and pretty well cut any chance of the Packers making the playoff this season. Now he's going to actually know the playbook even a little more. Can you imagine how little of the playbook he knew last week, and he was still able to put up a few decent drives and a game-winning touchdown? Now he's actually going to have a week to practice with the starter. He's going to have another week to learn the playbook. I don't think we're going to have any sort of like a crazy 300-yard, 3-touchdown game by Baker Mayfield or anything. But I think we're going to see a really efficient game by Baker Mayfield, and the Rams defense is going to find ways to pretty well shut down that Packers offense. And we are going to see the Packers eliminated from the playoffs by Baker Mayfield.
Even with the loss, we are not mathematically eliminated.
Yeah, sure.
We still will have a small chance.
It's got to be like 1% if you guys lose this game.
I think it moves down to 3% with the loss. And that just depends on what happens earlier in the day, or earlier on Sunday.
Yeah.
But I am terrified of Baker Mayfield, of him coming out and having that really good game. It seemed to really click for him in LA, especially late in the game. But I just really hope that the Packers defense will be able to keep him under wraps.
Yep, another one of those guys with just the winning spirit. So that was our predictions for week 15 of the NFL season. As mentioned already, of course, no bye weeks this week, full slate of game from here on out. So keep watching every week to Eating W's to see our predictions and thoughts on the games. But until next time, don't forget
To eat the W.